So I'd like to introduce again Adam Piacente from Marin SAT Prep.
My name's Adam Piacente. I've been teaching SAT and ACT prep in Marin for over 20 years now. Let me get up that slide. I'm a retired attorney and law school professor. I actually wrote the official guide to the Lexis.com research service. If any lawyers are in the audience, they know what I'm talking about. Way back when they first had the rollout. But since 2006, I've been working instead of law students, I've been working with high school students. And Marin SAT Prep, the company, we've helped thousands of students. I've helped nearly 1,000. I went back and looked at my numbers. I'm getting close to 1,000 over the last 20 years, helping students improve their scores. I don't do any college advising or anything like that. My job is just to get your numbers up, and that's what I focus on. But in the interim, in terms of, I do basically private tutoring and some group tutoring for the SAT and ACT. Also, over the years, I've worked with a number of local high schools, nonprofits, doing college nights, things like that. With Belvedere Tiburon Library, we've been doing this program for about 15 years now. Rebecca and I have been doing that. Rebecca, I just want to say thank you for hosting this. For those of you who don't know Rebecca, she is, and I always say it, she's the hardest working youth librarian in Marin. So thanks very much. So let's get into this. Okay, first of all, admission tests, how important are the tests? Admission tests are required or optional over 95% of four-year nonprofit colleges. We'll get into difference between required and optional in a second. 83% of college test scores say the test scores are of considerable or moderate importance. So they are something the schools want to see. It really helps them determine college readiness, whether your student is academically qualified to succeed at the university. And that's really what they're looking for. And in fact, what they're really looking for is whether or not you're going to succeed through first year. That's the real purpose of these tests, because they don't want dropouts, and students who are able to get through the first year statistically are most likely to graduate. It's that first year where they tend to wash out. So if students are not, if they think the student's going to get through first year, then they can handle the rest of the work. So that's the purpose of the testing is really if it boils down to, can you convince the admissions officers that you can handle the work for that first year? Okay, Michelle did a little of this. I'd like to do a little more on this, on the factors of college admissions. There's an old sort of, the old chestnut for this is the three legs of the stool. Grades is one, test scores another, extracurriculars. This is a survey, the NACAC survey of all college admissions. And as you can see, admission test scores, about 83% consider them of considerable and moderate importance in college admissions. So they do want to see them, and we're going to see how much they actually do affect the decision-making in a sec. But in general, if you are, let's say, not every student has a great ride through 4 years of high school for a lot of different reasons, and most things out of their control, like health issues or emotional issues or family issues or just anything that goes on. And a lot of times, you don't get students who are just 4.0 all the way through, or have to learn skills and whatever. So if your student hasn't been the greatest student for 4 years, there's no question that studying for the tests and improving your score on the test is the easiest and most effective way to improve your chances for admission. Because you can, by junior year, you've already got 2 years under your belt. You can really work hard and get all A's for one semester, but that's still only an eighth of your score. Whereas if you work on you prep and you do you improve, let's say, a couple of 100 points on your SAT, you can improve you're improving your percentiles, and we're going to see more on how this all works, by like 20, 25%. in terms of admissions, and that can really make a huge difference in the number of schools that are willing to look at you seriously for admissions. So it really is the easiest and most effective way to really boost your profile in terms of the schools you're looking at. Also, in addition, Michelle talked about this previously, SAT scores are used for college admissions, and typically the breakdown is if you're in the top 25% of your incoming freshman class in terms of what your scores were, that's typically the cutoff for most schools for academic scholarship. So if you want to get money back, what I like to say is sometimes their students are like, I want to get the score because I want to get the best score I possibly can because they get in the best school. Sometimes, you may have a good score. It may not be the best score for this top flight school you're looking for, but if, say, a school that's slightly lower where you actually are in the top 25, all of a sudden you can start thinking about getting money back. So there's some things in terms of your SAT that really open up opportunities, not just in terms of your missions, but also in terms of how much it's going to cost you. Okay, so everybody asks about required versus optional. Let's just talk about what they are first, and then we'll talk about sort of how it works sort of in the real world. Test required schools, all students must submit your ACT scores when applying. They need to see them in order for this application to be complete. It's not like the old days, though. I get a lot of parents who are like, well, they do ACT or SAT. It doesn't matter anymore. Every school takes either the ACT or SAT. There's no difference. It used to be where one would take one or the other. Now it will accept either one. For test optional, students may submit SAT scores when applying for admission. Um, long story short, you should, if you're test optional, in my opinion, as an SAT tutor, you should submit your scores if you're in the range. We're going to see about that in a minute. But two things that happened, a little background, things that happened when schools started implementing test optional during COVID was that it increased the school's average test scores, because what they basically did was they cut out the bottom third of the regular pool and made that test optional. So they didn't automatically just look at your scores if you were in the bottom third of the SAT pool to let you in if they thought you were in the range. So it increased the average test scores, and we'll see this in a minute. It also increased the number of applications, which decreases the acceptance rate. So there was one school, I think it was an Ivy League school, that once they put in test optional, they made an extra $6 million in just application fees alone because they got so many applications. Oh, this great school isn't asking for test scores anymore, so let's go submit. So they got a lot of extra applications in there, and it really decreases the acceptance rate. I'm just giving that kind of background on how it affects it to see exactly, to make my point about why you should submit scores. So let's just take an example here. Okay, so this is not any particular score. This is just an example of different schools, an example of a random school. So before test optional, let's say this was your range, about 1,300 to should be 1,450 on that. And you've got the bottom 50, top 50. After test optional, you can see how they've gotten rid of that bottom third. They just put all of that pool of students within that bottom third into sort of the no score pool, and so students who submit the scores tend to go up because they've kind of cut those out. They've given more students in the bottom range a chance, or without scores a chance. But here's the deal, and Michelle and I have talked about this, and I don't think she doesn't qualify in this group, but there are a lot of college counselors you may hear from who will tell you that you should only submit scores if you're in the top whoops, sorry, let's go back. If you're in the top 50%, in my opinion, that is not a valid argument, not a valid thing, strategy. Here's why. First of all, let's say you're at a 1400. And in this situation, that puts you after test optional in the lower 50%. Well, if you before test optional, now here's the deal. The group up here is no different than the group they let in here. It's just that they've cut out the bottom number of scores so that all of a sudden their scores go up. So it's the same number of students at the end of the day. If there's no more, they're not getting more 1,500 students than they used to. But down here, you know, you would have been kind of solidly in the score range for that. But if you don't tell them you're in, say, this area here, if you don't tell them you've got a 1,400, well, they're going to assume you're somewhere in here. So whereas a 1,400 at that school is clear evidence that you are, you know, like I said, before test option, you're in 1,400 right here. You're you know, you're basically right in the middle of the scores for a given school. They know you can do the work. They know you're going to get through first. You're okay based on those scores. However, if you don't tell them that, then they're just going to assume you're not. And you're really hurting your application. And real quick story, I had one student, I worked for a long time. The student had specific learning issues, and we worked pretty hard with him. It was an ACT score, and he went from a 26 to a 32 composite. And his mom talked to a college counselor, and she said, well, you shouldn't, because the schools are looking at it, was an Ivy League school at the time. You shouldn't submit it. And I kind of went back and forth where they're kind of telling her that, really trying to convince her that she should submit the scores, because it was in the range. It just wasn't at the top of the range. And she ended up submitting the scores, and the student ended up getting into Cornell. And she thanked me for that, because it really, I want to point that out, because test optional is not what it thinks. It's not like, oh, we don't care about your scores. That's not what they're saying. What they're saying is they're trying to give students who may not have great test scores for whatever reason. They come from a school, they're from a lower income, and they can't afford test prep or whatever it is. They're trying to give those students a chance, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that doesn't mean that if you are in the range, if you do have your scores, that you shouldn't be submitting these scores, because it really is not a good strategy just to say, okay, if I don't get a great, fantastic score, I shouldn't submit, because you are in the range, and it will help. I argue that even if you're down here somewhere, you know, and you're making a reach, maybe to get into that school, that you still want to submit it, because you knew, even if you're at the low level, you still know you're the top of the level of students who don't submit scores, and you still got a chance. That's my own opinion. Like I said, I'm an SAT tutor, so you know, there is a thing. But even if I wasn't there, I would still say the same thing. It just makes sense in terms of that. Okay, so let me get off that, but that's just my little spiel on test optional. Okay. In support of that, you know, Kaplan did a college admissions officers survey in 2020. 67% said the score helps. And the numbers actually show that, prove that out. Here's an example, and this was from the first year they put in test optional, of students who actually were admitted to college without scores versus admitted to college with scores. And if you look at the admissions rates for all of these schools, we'll go down to the end here and look at Boston College, for instance. Students who didn't submit students who did submit scores were 2.7 times more likely to get into that school than students that didn't. And if you look across all of these, it's basically, a lot of them are just basically, if you average it out, it's about 2 to 1. So you're far more likely to get in if you've got some scores which are at least in the range for those schools. Because they are still looking for students, and that's even more so now. There's a real push, actually. The test optional is sort of, the wave of it has peaked, and now there are a lot of schools that are reinstituting the SAT as a requirement because they're getting too many applications that they just can't tell which from without the scores whether these students are actually meeting their requirements. And so many of the most selective schools have reinstituted the SAT and ACT as required. I think more are coming, but in general, the whole idea of this test optional is fading, and and schools are realizing that, hey, we still really do need the tests, which is why they implemented in the first place back in the 60s to do that. Now, with that said, the caveat, as many of you know, UCs and CSUs do not require the SAT, and people, but there's a sort of, I'm getting students now and parents asking me, well, I hear a rumor they're reinstituting it and it's coming back and everything. I can't tell you that that's going to happen. I do know that, for instance, UCSD came up with just put out a long report on how no test admissions has been working for them. And it's basically a big white flag saying, hey, can we please put the test back for a number of reasons I don't need to get into right now. But there is pressure to bring them back. Whether or not by the time your student is applying to these schools, that's going to happen, I have no idea. But it is, I do believe eventually it's coming back. But in general, when, we don't know. Okay, so my recommendation is definitely take the test expands your college choices. It improves your admission chances we talked about and increases scholarship opportunities. For all these reasons, it's really important to take these tests. Okay, so let's compare different SAT and ACT when you're determining which one you want to take. Basically, the plain distinction between the two of them is that the ACT is much more of a sprint. The SAT is an obstacle course. The SAT, when I say obstacle course, is much more, there's more of an IQ component, and a few more tricks, a few more different strategies you need to know for the SAT. The questions are written not as plainly. They want students to be able to think about the question. There's a few more, they throw more curveballs at you. Once you have the strategies in place, once you know what you're looking for, getting through the obstacles is fairly easy. But if you don't know what those obstacles are, where you're going from, it's very easy to get tripped up. ACT is, the questions are much more straightforward. However, there's more, especially on the math side, there's more content that you need to know, but there's also more questions in the same amount of time. So you really need to move very quickly. So it's much more of a sprint. It's more like teaching someone how to run more quickly rather than how to jump over the obstacles, which is the SAT. So if your student is someone who likes to move quickly through tests, tends to finish early, a lot of times the ACT is a better test for them. If your student is more methodical, likes to take their time, doesn't mind sort of the puzzles and the trick side, oftentimes the SAT is a better test for them. ACT will come in a digital format or a paper format, so you can do it online or take the paper. Personally, I prefer my students, if they've got the choice here on the ACT, to do the paper. It's especially valuable on the performance subjects of reading and science, especially in the reading, because the passages are long and it takes students a while to get through them. So being able to mark that up on paper is a lot easier for them than having to do it on a screen. Digital SAT is a digital format for all of it, so you don't really have a choice. The SAT, well, let's go back to the ACT for a minute. Science is optional. I recommend taking the science if you're going to do it. The schools, and Michelle, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, but schools tend to be really focused on STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, math, which is the math and science portions of the test. We're going to see the subjects in a minute. I'll show you. But they really want to see that STEM. So if you've got a chance on the science, take it. You don't have to know any science. It's just a matter of how well you can read charts and graphs. And pretty much students, even if they don't really have a big science background, can do pretty well on that if if they, once they use the format of the questions. The essay, they still offer this college, this is not the application essay. This is an essay you write while you're taking the test. This was installed back in 2015. The colleges said they wanted to see a raw writing sample in case they suspected you didn't write your college application. It was really kind of a failed experiment. The SAT, when it came out with its new digital format, got rid of the essay entirely. ACT still hangs on to it, but none of the schools really want to see it. So it's not necessary you do the essay. But I would recommend that you do the science optional on that, the science test on that. For that. Okay, so finally on the SAT side, the difference between ACT and SAT is that SAT also has an adaptive module. And what that means is they'll give you the first module, which is basically a general overview of say the verbal section, where they'll give you a bunch of different questions that are easy, medium, and hard. Depending on how you do on that first module, they're going to give you a second module that's either the easier module or the harder module. And if you get the easier module on the second one, the most you can get, scores you can get, is a 600 out of 800 on either one of the subjects. Again, we're going to talk about scores in a sec. If you get the harder module, then oftentimes the lowest you can get is sort of the high 500s into the six. And it's a matter of, when you get the harder modules, which we try and get all our students into the harder module, because that kind of guarantees you a baseline number. Then it's a matter of ratcheting up to get to go as high as you can. Okay, so let's talk about the nitty gritty of the test. Is ACT is 4 subjects: English, math, reading, and science being optional. Each subject is 0 to 36 points. Top score is 36 for any subject. And what they call the ACT composite score is an average of all those scores. So they just average the 4 subjects. Whatever you get, whatever that average is your final composite score. They round up. So if you're at 31.5, they'll call it a 32. On the SAT, it's 2 subjects, 200 to 800 points apiece. Basically, they don't like you saying this, but it's 200 points just to write your name. And then the top score is 800. They add the verbal and scores together. Each one's for a total score sum of 1600 is your best score you can get. Okay, so how do you decide which test you're going to take? Now, if I've got a student who's got time and wants to do this, I will like them to take both the ACT and SAT official practice tests, so we can see which one they have better tendencies are. A lot of students will come in pretty much at the same rate. And the way you tell that rate is by what they call these concordance tables. These are official tables that are put out by the College Board and ACT in conjunction, which kind of give you a range. So for instance, looking at on the left there, if you're ACT 30, that's a range of about 1370 on your SAT. And these are this is how you can tell how well you're doing. Most students who take the practice test, both practice tests, tend to do fairly evenly, but I do, and especially this is true lately, seeing a much bigger gap between certain scores. Some students will do better on the SAT, some students do better on the ACT. And whereas before that wasn't as much of a case, now you are seeing gaps where these tests definitely have students definitely have tendencies towards one or the other. So it's a really good idea to take both tests to determine which one you've got the better potential at. Okay, so we're going to get into the calendar for this in a minute, but I want to emphasize to everybody right now that it really is important that you take either test at least twice. A lot of parents, a lot of students, they get prepared for that first test, and I just want to take it, and I just want to get these numbers out of the way, and let me just get my numbers and I'm done. I will tell you right now that for the most part, students who take their first test almost very rarely use their first test scores as their final numbers, because it's like jumping in the pool. The first time you jump in a pool, you can have lessons on the side of the pool tell you how to swim, but until you jump in the pool in that live test environment with all the students around and you're nervous and you're trying to process all the different strategies and rules, you're just not going to put it all together as well as you do the second time. And even the third time. So basically what I like is for students to take the test twice during junior year to really sort of optimize their numbers going into the summer. And then you go look at schools, you see, what your options are, where you think you can get in. And then you might talk to a college counselor and they'll say, well, yeah, we like you, but if you can get your math score up by about 50 points, I think we got a good shot at getting in. So then senior year, you take it the last time to really polish up your numbers. And seniors almost always do their best, especially boys, and especially on the verbal side. So but in general, if you've got students to lag on the verbal side, that senior year, you really see the numbers pop on the verbal side. Also on the math as well. My best numbers I get are always for seniors doing that fall test, but especially on the verbal side, if you feel like your verbal number is not where you want it to be, often senior year is the time that they really, for some reason, they just really improve on that. Okay, let's talk about a calendar here. So the stars are sort of my ideal. If I've got a student, this is what I'd like them to do in terms of the calendar. That early December test for juniors, I like them to get in a test, and for I like them to take the test at least once in December or in first semester, usually December, because I've had a chance to work with them. We're just getting the points on the board. We understand probably these are scores we're not going to be using, but we're getting a live test environment, the experience of that, so that when you take it again in either February for the ACT or March for the SAT, you feel like you're an old pro. You feel like you're coming in, you've got some numbers, you're working to improve, and it's that second time where you really see those numbers pop. And it's a really good calendar because the later you get into that semester, the second semester, especially because you're hitting those, especially for the SAT, that May test hits right before the week before the AP exams. And students are just, at that point, they're just kind of walking zombies. They're just trying to get through. Junior is the toughest. Second semester is very difficult. And they really, performance tends to lag. They're just tired. And a lot of these tests are performance based in a lot of ways. So they just don't tend to perform as well on those late tests. So I like to get, like, if I've got my juniors, I'll get them first time into December, get that first test out of the way, and then they're really looking to get some nice numbers on the board February and March, and then come back. Because the other thing about getting a couple of scores in is because you've got a nice portfolio going into when you're talking to schools in the summer. And a lot of times, you're doing these college visits, it's also you're selling yourself to them, right? And if you have numbers already booked, if you have official numbers that are not just, I took a practice test and I got this and I think I can do this, but if you've got actual numbers, official numbers that you can say, here's my score report, they're going to look at you a lot more seriously than they are some student that thinks they can get those numbers. And so it really does help sell you to them. And then again, that mid-September, early October tests for the ACT and SAT are by far the best performing tests of the year. Those are when I get my best numbers for seniors taking those tests. I will give you a caution on that late August SAT. A lot of parents and students like to get well, let's do something over the summer and then have them take that late August SAT so they can get everything out of the way before they start the senior year. It's a good strategy, but it doesn't work, because what happens is that late August test, students are still in summer mode. Their clocks aren't back on that regular academic schedule, and there's that brain fog and they just don't perform as well. That August test is just not a good performing test. Whereas once they're back in the academic environment, once they've got their clocks back on schedule, they take that early October, they're focused for for applications, obviously. They're focused for their numbers, and they really do a very nice job on that early October test. So while you'd like it to get it out of the way in August, chances are if you really want to maximize your numbers, early October for that SAT is the way to go. That mid-September for the ACT, that's the one you want to take. Okay, so when to start prepping? Earliest summer before junior year. I get a lot of people, and anytime before summer going to junior year, they just really haven't had, especially on the math side, but also their reading skills just aren't developed enough. So summer going into junior year, I mean, I do have some sophomores that come in for special reasons, but for the most part, summer going to junior year, for struggling students, busy students, or just you feel like you just want to get it, you just want to get started, and that's fine. Also, it's for National Merit Scholar is the PSAT for junior year also links up with National Merit Scholar qualifying test, NSMSQT. And basically the PSAT is a practice SAT. It's not, it doesn't count towards your college admissions, but it's just a practice test that the schools, it's official practice that this basically run through the high schools that determines National Merit Scholar. National Merit Scholar is basically you get some money back if you become a National Merit Scholar. I think it's like $2,500 or something, but it's a really nice thing to put on your application. In order to do that, in order to qualify for that, you need to be in the top 2% of your state. California being the largest state, it's the toughest to get in. Generally, you need about somewhere in the mid 1400s on the PSAT scale to do that. But you can also get, even if you don't get the actual scholarship, you can also be a qualifier and so on, which shows that you actually had some nice numbers on that as well. Best time to start is early junior year, again, for the calendar we talked about, hit for December and then February. Toughest is late junior year because of the way the calendar is. You can also do, I get a lot of people who just, for whatever reason, haven't gotten the prep in junior year. Oh my God, am I too late starting senior year? Not really. As I say, seniors do better than juniors. You're more developed. I have a lot of students that I get senior year that do very well. And so there isn't necessarily, just because you haven't prepped in junior doesn't mean you can't do well senior year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but while I'm here, might as well. So talking about early action, early decision, a lot of people think that, oh, well, my application has to be in, I don't know, November 1st, November 15th, whatever it is. So I can't really take the November or September or December SAT or ACT. That's not true, actually, unless you're going early action. So the September, October tests, if you're going early action, those are the last ones. September ACT, October SAT. Those are the last ones you can take. But if you're not going early decision or early action, you can take the November, even the December tests, and they will forward on your scores because they're not making decisions until after the first end of the year, end of the first year, end of the year anyway. So you can get those tests in, and they'll look at those. So if you really still want to polish up your sort of portfolio of numbers, it's a really good time to do it. I just had a student, a senior, she took the November test. She went from a 1420, I think, to a 1520, and that really opens up her options there. So it really can help to do those late tests. People think they think seniors can't do it, but it really can help. And especially because, again, seniors do better than juniors. So it's a nice way to polish up your numbers then. Okay, let's talk briefly about test registration. Sign up early. This isn't as bad as it used to be. A couple of years ago, I had students driving out of state. They've for these tests because there just wasn't any room in any of the test centers. Now it's still pretty packed, especially for that March SAT that's coming up soon. So get in as early as you can. Book test dates as well ahead to ensure your seat. And if it is booked up, but you really want to get in there, wait. This is especially true on the ACT, but the SAT as well. But a lot of times, the week or two before, you get a lot of people just canceling for different reasons on the test. And you can get in there, you can sneak in, but you got to keep looking to see whether or not there are any testing centers open. As I said, this isn't as extreme as it was, say, a couple of years ago. They've really done a better job of expanding testing opportunities. But for the most part, and especially in Marin, and I've said this every year since I've started this, Marin is underserved in terms of the number of testing centers and and the slots that they have available. And so you really want to be careful. You really want to make sure that you can get in the right place, because you don't necessarily want to be driving down to the city if you can take it, say, locally. So for all those reasons, get in early on your test registration. Okay. Also, a little ACT tip. ACT will give you, used to call it the test information report, but now it's the ACT My Answer Key. And basically, they'll give you the test booklet and your answers. And this is really helpful, especially for someone like me, to see exactly what the student is missing, exactly what questions, whether they got in trouble on the time, late. You can really just have a nice map of the entire test, and you can drill down the exact questions that they miss. You can really polish up any weaknesses that you have. The My Answer Key is available October, April, and June tests. So if you're taking one of those, definitely order that booklet, because it's really important. That's the ACT My Answer Key. Okay, one other thing when you're signing up, do not submit score reports during test registration. They always try and sell you, a few of you. Great, I'm signed up for the March SAT. I'm going to submit to Harvard. Well, you don't know how you did yet. So you don't necessarily want to show them that number unless you're, after all the testing is done, you can decide which scores you're going to pick. Talk about that in a second. But in general, you don't submit any scores until you finally get all of your numbers in place and you know which scores you want to put in. Okay, so what do all these scores mean and how does it all translate? So basically, and if you read sort of across, this is generally sort of the levels we're talking about. So for instance, if you're at a 500 or what would be basically 1,000 for the SAT, that's sort of what they call minimal college readiness. This is to get into any school that wants tests. And you're around the 40th, maybe the ACT, maybe it's about a 19, maybe 50th percentile for that on a 20. Those are sort of minimal college readiness. The next step at 600 or about 25 is where the more selective schools start. So that's sort of the level where you want to get to if you're looking for a more selective school. That's where they start. Then that next level, 700, about a 30 on the ACT, that's where the very selective schools start. So if you're looking for I don't know, top 100 school maybe, then you really want to get on the SAT 700 per score, about a 1,400 total, or over you want to crack 30 on the ACT. Scores reported online, you get them back in 2 through 3 weeks. If you want them by mail, I don't know who does mail anymore, 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, and finally, sending your scores. When you're sending your scores, we talked about don't send them before you get all your scores back. Most colleges will accept your best test sittings. It's what they give you what they call super score. And the way it works is this. Let's say the first time you took a test and you got let's say you got 600 on the verbal and a 700 in math. I'm just making these numbers up. And then the next time you take the test, you don't do quite as well on the math side, but you get a 700 on the verbal side. Well, you submit both tests, and they will take the best scores from both sittings. So instead of getting, say, within a 13 on either one of those tests, your super score, which is the one thing that they're going to look at for the most schools, is going to be a 1,400. So another reason why you really want to take this thing twice, because once you get numbers on the board that first time, then we're just ratcheting up the numbers. If you get a breakup number, say on one, like you take the first score and you get a breakout number, say on the verbal or the reading on the ACT or something like that, you've always got that score. So we're just ratcheting up different numbers to try and get your best score possible across the board. And ACT right now, SAT did that for a long time. ACT does it now. ACT right now, their whole score report is just based on your super score. So it really is sort of the way the colleges have all gone with this. There are a few colleges. I thought maybe I might even delete this because it's very few colleges now want all test settings or will accept only your best settings. Check with your individual schools, obviously, for anything because they all have sort of little different policies here and there. I'm giving a general overview on this, but overall, the vast majority will super score your tests. Okay, that's my little spiel. Anybody has any questions, please let me know.
Adam, we had a couple questions in the chat.
Yeah.
One person wants to know the difference between if the content for the PSAT is different than the content for the official SAT.
Yeah, it's a good question. Hang on, let me stop this sharing here. It's a good question. No, the short answer is no. The questions are pretty much the same difficulty. The thing about the PSAT though is that sometimes they'll throw in some experimental questions on that. They do a few experimental questions on the SAT sometimes, but the PSAT, they're using sort of the practice SAT is sort of, they're using the students a little bit as guinea pigs to test out new questions that they want to do. So sometimes you get on the PSAT, you get some questions that are like, I'll even say to a student, don't worry about that question. You're not likely to see on the test. It's sort of like, it does give you an idea of sort of things that they might be thinking about throwing in the future. But but usually they're just trying out different ways of asking a question. Long story short, they're pretty much the same. There is a difference though in the scaling of that though. The typical SAT is 1600. The PSAT is actually a 1520 scale. So if you get a 1400 in your PSAT, you can if you want to extrapolate it out to an SAT, you can add a few points on that. So a 1400 on the PSAT is kind of like a 1420 or 1430 on the SAT, depending, because the scale is a little bit different. It's a little tighter scale in the PSAT.
There was one more question. I think you have addressed this, but just to make sure here.
Yeah.
One person wanted to know if it looked bad to take the test multiple times, and can you take it as many times as possible?
No and yes. So because you have the choice to submit your scores. So they have what's called, SAT calls it what's known as score choice. So you don't have to show them the test sittings you don't want to show them. On the ACT, it's a little different because like I said, they'll just submit your super score, and that's really what the schools are looking for. But if you're really concerned, like, well, I had a really bad ACT the first time I took it, you can always delete your scores on that. And that's the way you do it on the SAT and the ACT side. SAT is a little more user-friendly with that. ACT, it's basically just submitted delete, and I don't want this on my record at all, and they'll take it off. ACT may be coming up with a better system than that nowadays, but the short answer is no on that. And what was the second question?
I think you addressed it, but can you choose which scores you want to submit?
Yeah.
And you can take it as many times.
And yes, you can take it as many times as you want. I do have students, especially students who need extra time. A lot of times I work with students who need extra time. And a lot of times it's just or students with severe test anxiety. They need to take it a few times to really get comfortable in that testing environment. And so, the more times you take it, the better you're going to do. For every student's different. Vast majority of students, if you take it 3 times, that's when you're optimizing your score the most. And that's why that calendar I laid out before is really effective. But, I do have students who, they just keep getting better. And so we keep going. Once, you're done when you start topping out. I mean, at some point, your numbers, I'm not going to do any better than this. This is where I'm at. And if you're really looking to maximize your scores, sometimes you do want to take it more than 3 times, but generally most students will take it twice and then third time in senior year if they want to.
I'm going to read another question. I just want to announce we are at noon. If the participants have the time to hang around
I'm
and do some
fine.
more questions, we can go a little late. But one more question on the chat is what level mathematics are in the PSAT, SAT, and ACT tests?
Yeah, it's a good question. So
Math courses.
yeah, the ACT in terms of content is a little more advanced than the SAT. The SAT is basically beginning algebra 2, or not beginning algebra 2. A lot of quadratics, a lot of parabola questions, a lot of advanced algebra stuff. The ACT has more pre-calc stuff in it, more trig, more geometry, advanced geometry. Um, so it's a little bit more advanced. And uh, but like I said, like the questions are more straightforward. So if you just happen to know the topic, if you've had trigonometry, it's not usually that difficult. Whereas the SAT, while the content is more limited, the questions are more tricky. So again, it gets back to that whole sprint versus obstacle course. Generally, if a student's taking pre-calc, they should have no problem for the ACT, even for the or for the SAT. If a student is in algebra 2, if I got a junior now, like an algebra 2 or something like that, then probably the SAT is a better test because while there's a little bit of trig on the SAT, it's very easy to just clean up quickly.
Thank you, Adam. I think that's the only question on the chat board. Does anyone want to chime in with any more questions for either Michelle or Adam? And you can either go to the chat or just speak up. And while we're waiting for questions, I'll just tell you anecdotally, because my daughter's a senior and just went through this process. She took the SAT twice, once in San Francisco because we couldn't get in Marin County. It does book up pretty quickly. The second time at San Rafael High. She had a good experience with both settings. They each had kind of some pros and cons, but for the second test at San Rafael High, she just drove herself. The first exam in San Francisco was actually at the Hilton. It was not at a high school. And just to eliminate the stress of driving there in the morning, we checked in the night before and stayed the night. And they did give some perks to families. The whole Hilton was full of high school students and their parents, and they gave the students a meal voucher. And so it was a pretty stress-free environment. Whereas I know another family who drove to the Hilton in the morning and they barely got there before they shut the door and didn't let any more students in. So every testing center is going to have, a different environment, different situation. My daughter ended up applying to mostly UC and CSU schools who do not accept the test scores. It's not optional. They don't want them. They don't accept them. But because she had done so well, especially on the second test, her scores did improve. But she did so well on one section, the verbal section, they invited her to be a peer tutor. So although she didn't need her scores for the applications, in that case, she ended up getting an extracurricular, volunteer activity out of it that she used to boost her applications. So she did several hours of peer tutoring for the SATs. So it is a good idea to, even if you think you're not going to use the scores, you never know what opportunities it's going to open up. And again, it can boost your opportunities for financial aid and scholarships. We've got another chat here from someone's student. For college admissions, does an A plus versus an A minus matter because some teachers only give max A of a score A?
I'll go ahead and jump in. That sounds like up my alley. For private colleges and universities, they will look at the transcripts and they will look at the different grades and they will know sort of what your school's grading system actually is. So they will have they will read that transcript and look at all the different gradations between A pluses, A's, and A minuses. Schools also know that not all high school teachers will give A pluses, and so they will be aware of that fact. That is not necessarily something that you would expect, that an A plus is actually the highest grade in a class, right? They will know that by context. In terms of the UCs and the CSUs, when they actually go through and look at the grades, and they will sort of recalculate students' GPAs based on their particular system, those pluses and minuses don't actually matter. They will even out to straight letter grades that then they will sort of put into that particular system. So just know that every college and university is a little bit different, but they will read those grades and transcripts within context.
Also, if your student is taking AP courses, those are going to weigh heavier. So even if they get a B minus instead of a B plus, it's going to count for more.
Absolutely. That's the rigor piece that I was talking about. So they do know that certain courses are honors level or IB or AP, and they take that into consideration when looking at the grades. And if you're at a school that doesn't offer APs, they will also know that as well, right? So they will sort of take all that into account as they're looking at transcripts.
Any further questions? I just wanted to thank everyone for participating and remind you that we will send out a recording as well as I think we can send the slides from the presentations. But I'll give everyone a few more seconds to chime in if you have any last questions or comments. In the chat, it says if your school doesn't offer AP, they still do look at whether or not you're taking AP tests. Is that correct?
I mean, they will. They will also know that like your school doesn't offer the coursework for an AP exam. And so if your student does choose to self-prepare for an AP exam, they will know that they've done that on their own, that that wasn't actually a part of their preparation. And I feel like there was one more question. How do colleges weigh courses taken outside your school at a community college or online? That you would submit those as a separate transcript when you actually apply to the school. And so say your student took a class at College of Marin, they would know that that's a college level course, and they would sort of look at that accordingly.
And Michelle, one more follow-up. Is there a certain number of AP tests one should take?
It really depends on the student, and it depends on what they're interested in. You obviously want to go ahead and go for rigor. So if your student is really strong in STEM, they may want to take several AP. They may want to take chem, or they may want to take physics, or they may want to take bio, like whatever is actually appropriate for them. If they're more humanities based, they may want to make sure that they're taking both of the English exams, Comp and Lit, and Lang and Comp, and they may want to take a couple of the different history exams. So you want to kind of find that sweet spot where they're starting to take some APs junior year, seeing how that's going, planning on taking more APs senior year, sort of really focusing on the subjects that they're good at. You want to be careful though that you don't have a student taking all AP classes all senior year with all those AP exams. So students can get overwhelmed. So you want to find that sweet spot where they're challenged, where they're going to do well, where they're really developing themselves, but they're not going to get overwhelmed by taking too many.
Okay, well, last call for questions. I'll just take this opportunity to thank our presenters again, Adam and Michelle. I will send out follow-up information to everyone who registered, as well as the contact information, the websites for Marin SAT Prep and Samara Counseling. And thank you everyone who participated, and good luck.
Thank you, Rebecca. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to end the recording now.